And welcome back to coverage here of the World Championship. Marcel Sutcliffe with Paul Cheon. Take a deep breath, everybody. We had a real exciting match there that last time, and we're going to settle right into game number 1 of our next match. This is a Grixis mirror between Eli Kassis and Jan Merkel. They actually tested together for this, Paul, so they have the same list. They very much know the decks and what the other player thinks about them as well.
Yeah, and just looking in kind of on their testing process, I mean, the number one deck that they really wanted to play against was mono green, and they had a pretty good plan for that. But they probably didn't test too many matches of the mirror, right? Because nobody else was going to come up with this deck, but now you're going to get to see it here and just exactly how this matchup is going to play out between the two of them.
So as I mentioned, we're coming in game number 1. Looks like we're pretty deep into the game here. Okay. There's a lot of lands on the battlefield. And wow, there's a Lier on the battlefield now as well. So this is usually the death knell, or at least a big step in the right direction for whoever's the first player to land a Lier, and it looks like it's going to be Jan this time.
Yeah, and typically Lier, when you get to untap with Lier, it is a lot worse when you're playing in aggro deck, right? Because your deck is chock full of removal game 1, so you can just kill everything. Mm-hmm. You might have a little bit more of a chance here when you're playing the control mirror, because you're just going to have a bunch of removal spells in the graveyard. These decks actually don't have a lot in the form of disruption against other control decks. I think this deck is actually weak to just the stock version of Is It Epiphany, just because of the lack of counter magic that they play. And the reason they can't play counter spells is because Lier is a symmetrical effect. The moment Lier hits the battlefield, no spells can be countered. So the disruption that you need to play in your deck instead of counter magic has to be in the form of duress.
And that's right. We actually just saw a duress cast out of the graveyard there from Jan. It moved the galvanic iteration from the 2 mana to the 3 mana slot, as it's in the graveyard now. In the meantime, Lier's going to get in. Here's a Memory Deluge. Now we do see Demon Bolt to help solve this problem here from Eli's perspective.
Yeah, Demon Bolt has a way to get the Lier, but we see that there's a Fading Hope in Merkel's hand, so he will have the way to protect his Lier. But in order to replay it, of course, it will tax him for 5 mana of his own turn.
And critically here, there is a Lier in hand for Eli Kassis. Now, Jan knows about it. You can see the little eyeball icon on there that shows that your opponent has seen that card. They know it's there. But perhaps just not a whole lot to be done here from Jan's perspective.
Yeah, and a really great draw here from Kassis. I'm not sure what's in his graveyard, but he did have that Lier in the previous turn.
Jan actually has Demon Bolt in hand, it seems, but doesn't have a red mana available at the moment. Paul, is that what you're seeing?
Yep, that's what it looks like. So
he has the answer.
So if Eli had a duress, he'd be able to nab that from his hand, but he does not. Now again, keep in mind, since there's no counter magic here, Jan can successfully fire off this Alrund's Epiphany. It won't do that much, right? It'll just give you the 2 birds, but it's certainly not. We're currently not at a board state here where this will just end the game here, right? He just wants to try to find an answer and just kind of play an extra land and just get more information.
Yeah, this is kind of the floor. You get a card back and you get the 2 birds. Not bad, right? It could be a lot worse than that, but we're also used to seeing that be kind of the spell that gets cast to end the game, and that's not what we're seeing here. This is a really nice turn there, though, for Jan, especially if he can get this Lier off the battlefield before Eli can truly go off with it. It looks like he'll get a Prismari command out of the deal, and that's about it.
And for those of you who might still be new to this deck and you see that shiny little Jwari Disruption in the graveyard, again, Lier is a symmetrical ability, so that Demon Bolt cannot be countered. So if you cast Jwari Disruption, it will do nothing.
That's right. It's one of the few counter spells that actually made it into the deck. And that's because it's viewed as a relatively low downside to have it as tap land anyway. This deck is very mana hungry, and it runs a lot of lands, especially if you count the double face cards.
Eli found a Fading Hope here.
Oh, he actually hit. Well, looks like both players are going to protect their Lier from opposing Demon Bolts. Fair enough. But remember, Jan's got another turn coming here, so he gets to get back on board with his Lier and maybe take over the game. Oh, I like this. Spikefield Hazard's going to pick off a bird. And Jan's going to take advantage of, even if it is just a small lead with the birds, it adds up.
Right? I mean, we got to.
Oh, wow.
We got some demons here. Keep in mind, there's a Hall of Storm Giants in play as well for Jan.
Burn down the house, an interesting draw here as well. As at least in this scenario, he could use it to add to his board and actually quicken up his clock a little bit.
Although
but it looks like he wants to make hay while the sun's shining, so he's going to play Lier and then Expressive Iteration, and that makes a lot of sense, right, Paul? You got to get it while you got it here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this deck has no shortage of removal spells, so you have to assume that there is a really good chance that your Lier is not going to survive for another turn.
And while that isn't strictly true at the moment from Ili's side, you know, we see Memory Deluge, and then he has his own Lier, so any number of cards could come into the scene here. So yes, this is very smart from Jan to really just stock up. I mean, it feels like he's just going to try to use this turn to have a better hand in case his Lier were to die.
Yeah, and you know, taking a look at this board state, it does look like Jan is significantly ahead here, right? He does have the Lier with the Expressive Iterations in the graveyard, but keep in mind that Kassis does have an iteration in graveyard and a ton of mana in play. So if he draws an Alrund's Epiphany, I mean, that's 2 turns that allows you to, you know, cast that Deluge, flash it back as well. And we saw this in a previous matchup where Matt Sperling played against Andre Strasky, where it looked like Matt had a huge lead and Strasky just had an iteration in the yard. But guess what? Found that Alrund's Epiphany off the top and then was able to kind of claw back into that game.
Yeah, it really can snowball when you start getting the Epiphanies rolling. Here comes Lier. Just since we've joined, this will be the 4th time that Lier's hit the battlefield. They're kind of ping-ponging back and forth. But both players have one now.
Right, and there's a Demon Bolt and a Bloodchief's Thirst to get rid of it. But again, we're doing this little dance here because Jan does have a Fading Hope in the graveyard to protect his own Lier from a removal spell.
Yeah, we've seen the players be content to just make them burn those Fading Hopes and then have to pay the 5 mana to get Lier back on the battlefield. Huh. Looks like Eli might return the favor here with the Demon Bolt.
Yep, and then we're going to see
Fading Hopes
Fading Hope for both. But you know what? After that, we're done, right? We're done.
Right.
No more Fading Hopes.
Oh, man. What a weird matchup.
Yeah, a bit grindy. A bit grindy here.
You could say. This is a very Paul Cheon matchup, I have to say.
What?
You really excel at. No, I've seen you play these before, and this is your mode. Like, this is where you want to be. I'll
have you know, I incorrectly chose the mono white aggro decks as the deck to beat this time around. But now, you know, I'm allowed to be wrong, right? And yeah, these Izzet decks. Oh well, okay.
Yeah.
My bad.
I mean, I might, but I didn't commit, you know?
Yeah.
Here's Memory Deluge from Jan. It's got some powerful stuff in hand here. Let's see if he can add to it. Oh, no, another Fading Hope. Oh, the ping-pong match will continue between these two.
Last Lier standing is the winner. Maybe.
There's also a power word kill now for Jan.
Yep. And Eli, I believe, is out of ways to protect his own Lier.
Currently, yes. And there's Lier once again hitting the battlefield. This, again, is the 5th time that since we've joined the game, we've seen Lier hit the battlefield. So far, the advantage that Jan has been able to get is the 2 birds and a few cards in hand.
Yeah. One thing that I want to point out with, you know, just kind of how this matchup is being played when you compare it to some of the other Izzet mirrors that we've seen is those matchups typically tend to be a lot more draw-go, making your land drops and kind of jockeying for position. But because both of these decks aren't playing counterspells, it just plays more like a tap-out control mirror. It's like, you know what? I'm going to try to get as much value from all of my spells in my turn. It doesn't really matter if I tap out or not, because if you're going to copy Epiphany and cast it, there's not much I can do to stop you.
It's pretty much what we've seen here, too. There's Lier number 6 hitting the battlefield. Yeah, the only cards left are Blood Chief's Thirst and Jwari Disruption to go with the Galvanic iteration that we saw in the yard.
And
Yeah.
wait for
Number
it.
7 incoming. This power word kill killing Lier, though, will finally put it into the graveyard for good here on Eli's side. And then the Fading Hope. This is a big swing for Jan Merkel. This is really him saying, look, I'm going to be the last one with the Lier on the battlefield. And if that's the case, I like his chances.
I think Jan has lethal. If
Does
you
he
go
really?
make 3 devils and attack for 7 with the 2 birds, that's 12 damage. And if Eli had a Fading Hope, he probably would have protected his own Lier.
Yeah, you're right. He has enough mana to
Yeah.
do all of those things?
I mean, this game's been going for
Wow.
pretty long.
That's
So-
incredible. So as much as it was back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, it all came crashing down on Eli Kassis there at the end as Jan picks up the win in game number 1. Now, just to zoom out a little bit for you and set the stage, with a 4-4 record for Jan, he absolutely must win out. He has to win this and the next match just to have a chance at a tiebreaker match, and he's not even guaranteed that necessarily. But Eli Kassis still, you know, we like to say he controls his own destiny, and that means that if he wins here and he wins the next round, he'll get to that magic number 7 and he'll be in the top 4.
Yeah, and really curious to see kind of how they sideboard for this matchup here. Might be the same, might be not. Maybe they agreed not to do a sideboard guide for the mirror to allow them all to kind of figure it out amongst each other, which would be interesting. But, you know, as you can see, both players realizing how powerful Lier is in the matchup, along with those malevolent hermits that you would expect, they're bringing Mind Flayer in to kind of steal some additional creatures, right? So typically you look at a card like Fading Hope, oh, no, he took it out. But it's an interesting card to think about. Because normally you would be like, Fading Hope, well, that card's pretty bad, right? But it's like, well, they have Mind Flayer. Maybe I need to find some ways to bounce creatures if they do successfully steal my own creature.
Yeah. You've been on a number of pro testing teams before. How does that work? If 2 players or even more decide to play the same deck, isn't it get a little awkward with like what you want to tell about how to play against each other or what cards you put in your sideboard or stuff like that?
I mean, it really depends on what kind of deck you choose to play. Now, if you're choosing to play a deck that's a little bit off the radar that people aren't sure about, then yeah, I mean, you can just agree not to kind of do that sideboard, because then you can just be like, hey, may the best person win. We just go back and forth, right? And try to like one up each other. But oftentimes, even when I was on testing teams, we just kind of play one of the best decks available and just tweak and tune based on the expected metagame. In which case, you already have kind of a decent idea of the types of cards that you would want to bring in a mirror type situation, because that type of deck would be a part of the field.
All right, let's get into game number 2 here. Jan Merkel versus Eli Kassis. Again, both players highly incentivized to win this round and the next. Much more so for Eli, because it would be a hard lock for top 4, but Merkel's basically fighting for his top 4 life here. With another loss, he would effectively be out of contention for the tiebreaker in virtually all scenarios. So lots of pressure on Jan as well. And he did pick up game number 1. So one of the good for him, and already decisions are being made here. Malevolent Hermit is the option for Eli. Perhaps doesn't want to see it get hazarded out of here.
Yeah, I mean, he's got one staring right at him too, right? It's in his hand.
Yeah.
He's like, what if my opponent has one? And Jan did lead out with Basic Mountain, right? Lots of duels, and leading out with Basic Mountain, trying to bluff that he maybe has that Spike Field Hazard. So Eli instead choosing to wait a turn so that if he plays out the Hermit next turn, he can at least counter the Hazard and then pay the disturb cost.
All right, well, it looks like it's going to work out really well for Eli to be patient here, Paul. He's the one who gets to Spike Field Hazard the opposing Hermit.
Yeah, and Merkel now, I mean, he's got the iteration. Ooh, big draw here for Merkel in case Eli went for the counter on the iteration here.
And it does look like that's what's going to happen, Paul.
Yeah, so that Hall of Storm Giants was big. Jan would love to see another untapped land here to be able to cast that deluge and keep the mana flowing.
He currently doesn't have access to black for those duresses, correct?
He does not.
Yeah.
So
So that's a little rough too.
Oh,
Ooh,
big.
but there's a
Wow.
Clearwater pathway. Wow, like the
Yeah.
perfect draw for Jan here.
Yeah. Really, really big. Oh, and gonna look to just shred
Oh,
Eli's
wow.
hand here.
Double duress you off of Galvanic Iteration, says Jan Merkel, and all Eli Kassis can do is look on as his hand is going to get torn apart. Go blank is going to be one of the options here for Jan. And he's going to go for the Epiphany as well. Two heavy hitters coming out of the hand here for Kassis. Let's also not forget that Jan gets to know what's in hand here too. He knows that Kassis is on blanks. He just doesn't have anything going right now.
Yeah. So Jan's going to be significantly ahead on cards here, because if he doesn't draw a land, I mean, even if he does, he's probably just going to go for the Deluge here, just continue digging for mana sources.
Right.
And not a whole lot of pressure from Eli just yet. He's got the Hollow Storm Giant, still needs 2 more lands to be able to turn that into a 7/7.
Yeah, the Benevolent Geist will continue to chip away in the air, but Jan's not worried about that at the moment. He can really take his time to craft the hand, and as you mentioned, make sure to keep hitting land drops. Wow, he even got a Mind Flayer to go with a land here as well, so he could potentially just steal the Geist. He will duress, though, and I suppose that's to take the Power Word kill, given that he found the Mind Flayer here, Paul.
Yeah, oh, and an interesting draw here from Kassis.
Ooh.
He can Disruption a Mind Flayer if Jan doesn't draw an untapped land.
Oh, but he found another untapped land.
He did. Is
Oh,
he
but
gonna
he's
play
not
around
playing it. Oh, he's going to play the Mind Flayer out, and that means that Jwari Disruption's going to get him. Oh, he shakes his head and smiles. He's going to play a land after, but it's the tapped one. But little does Eli Kassis know that he really got him there.
Yeah.
Oh,
I mean,
that was a beating.
Yeah, that was a beating, but keep in mind, Jan is still the one who's cast Memory Deluge. He's got one in yard, and he's got another one in his hand. Interestingly enough, if he goes for the flashback, that'll also get hit by a Jwari Disruption.
I can't watch if that happens. Here comes Benevolent Geist. Now, it was Mind Flayer off the top here for Kassis.
Flashback? Flashback?
Oh, he's going to get him again.
Man.
These Jwari Disruptions are brutal. Remember, Jan knows about the Galvanic Iteration, so last time it was the only card he didn't know about. Now it's one of 2 cards. Goodness sakes.
Wow.
Jwari Disruption just doing serious work. You know, I think that Jan's making the right play there, but it just that one just didn't work out. I don't know about the other one. Is he supposed to play his untapped land first? Perhaps. It's unclear.
Yeah.
Low risk, but he did get punished maximum.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those situations, though, because you really want to play a tap land there, so you can flashback Deluge on the following turn.
Exactly.
Right? So you want to play the Mind Flayer, tap land, then flashback Deluge. It just so happened that Kassis' 2 out of his 3 draw steps were the Jwari Disruption.
That's right. It was and at that first one, it was the only unknown card. Like, I feel like if I'm Merkel, I kind of just shrug and say, you know, I would have done the same play again.
Yeah.
But boy, have they been effective, because now he's down to 10. But here comes the big hitter. No cards, no graveyard for Eli Kassis, thanks to Go Blank last turn for Merkel. And now he's got Lier, Disciple of the Drowned, on the battlefield, and he should just be able to run away with this thing, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, he just needs to find a way to deal with this Benevolent Geist. Now, keep in mind, though, I mean, Eli, if he draws an untapped land here, he can attack for 9.
Yeah, it would have been a really nice attack. He's got the Celestis over there. He drew Duress.
Yeah, this would have been a really, really good turn to draw that untapped land, because then that would have put a little bit of pressure on Jan.
Instead, he's going to activate the Celestis. He doesn't want the Duress here, potentially. He draws a land. He could use it for next turn.
Right.
And Duress, pretty ineffective when your opponent has Lier out. It just, you know, lets him cast it from a different zone instead. So he's going to keep the land down to 8. Goes Merkel. And Kassis is deciding, do I want to let him know that I've got the land for this Hall of Storm Giants?
It's rough if Jan casts Go Blink, right?
Right.
If he casts Go Blink from the yard, you lose out on your land.
Oh, he decided to keep it, though, perhaps valuing forcing Jan or encouraging Jan to use up more of that mana. This is a little bit of a backfire because now it's going to be a duress, which the good news is for Eli is that it misses. The bad news is that it gives Jan the information. So if he decides that land is worth going after, then he can go blank. If he has better stuff to do, then he won't.
And wow, I mean, just talking about Go Blank in general, this is a card that they identified was just good in the is it control matchups because you get to, not only take 2 cards out of their hand, but potentially snipe whatever flashback cards are in people's graveyards.
It's
but
huge.
In this matchup in particular,
it's
right?
Devastating in this matchup. It
with
shuts
Lier?
off Lier. Yeah. Really nasty card. Like, out of the sideboard, drawing one of these in this matchup is awesome. All right, the Celestis is once again going to go because there was 2 spells, and if it's Expressive Iteration, and he's got to discard one of these cards, Paul, does he just move in and try to get slamming with the Hall, or does he play for a slightly longer game? I don't like his chances in the long game here, Paul. I would just discard the iteration.
I think his best chance is to attack with the Hall of Storm Giants. I just don't think it's going to work out for him. Take a look at Jan's hand. I mean, we see double Epiphany. Now, Jan is forced to block here. This is a lethal attack, but he does have the backup Lier in hand with multiple Epiphanies here.
That's right. Especially if he could find a Galvanic iteration.
There's one in his yard, so he just needs an untapped land to cast double Epiphany.
He actually has enough, doesn't he? Yeah,
right.
but he does need the extra land. So he's going to go for Expressive Iteration, and then my assumption here would be that he will cast one of the Epiphanies after this.
Yeah, he should be able to lock it up here. He just goes Epiphany, find a land, then copy Epiphany next turn. You've got the Hall of Storm Giants. Your opponent's tapped out. He should have enough damage here.
And this is exactly what Eli Kassis did not want to see. You saw he winced when that card went on the stack because he knows that it doesn't get better from here. It just snowballs. And this is likely going to be Jan Merkel improving to 5-4 and keeping at least some ray of light open for his chances at the top 4. I mean, he is really on that edge. This will also mean if he's able to finish off the match here, and it looks like we may just see a good game here from Kassis.
That's 26 damage, so
it's enough.
28 damage.
Even better, and that's what Eli was doing the math on that as well. He drops down to 22. So Eli Kassis no longer has a clean route to the top 4, but he is not dead. He's going to lose this match to Merkel, but he could win the next round and find himself in a tiebreaker, depending on how his tiebreakers look and if he wins next round, of course.
I guess Merkel choosing to go with the cast more things, as he could have just activated the Hall. And Eli has had enough. He's like, okay, you got me.
Had enough. So a big win there for Jan Merkel. As an observer of the World Championship here, this was perhaps the most exciting outcome, as both players are still live for tiebreaker matches going forward, but they're both going to need to win their next round. So if you're rooting for either of these players, that is exactly where you need to be. Paul, big win there for Merkel, kept his dream alive.